The "you are not special" reframe. Every child arrives in the world convinced they are the main character, and for a while their parents confirm it. But at some point, the world stops playing along. The kid who is always the smartest in the room walks into a bigger room. The one who is always the fastest joins a team where three people are faster. What happens next depends entirely on whether they were taught that specialness is something you are or something you earn. Children who are raised on unconditional exceptionalism tend to collapse at that moment. Children who are told the truth, that you are ordinary until your effort makes you otherwise, tend to get curious instead of crushed. A parent can reinforce this quietly, just by praising the work more than the result. "You kept going when it got hard" lands differently than "you're so gifted." One builds identity around effort, the other builds it around something the child can't control. The reframe isn't cruel. It's actually the most generous thing a parent can offer, because a child who isn't waiting to be discovered is free to start building. The law of displacement. Emotional energy works like a battery, and children are rarely taught that. They spend full charge on a spilled drink, a mean comment from a classmate, a game they lost on a Tuesday afternoon, and then wonder why they have nothing left when something actually hard shows up. Teaching a child to triage their emotional responses isn't about suppression, it's about proportion. When a 10-year-old learns to ask themselves, how much does this actually matter, they're developing a skill that most adults never acquire. The goal isn't a child who feels less, it's a child who feels strategically, saving their deepest engagement for the problems worth solving and the people worth fighting for. The mortality drive. Most parents avoid the subject of death entirely, as if keeping it out of the conversation keeps it out of the house. But children who grow up with a quiet, honest awareness of their own finitude tend to develop something rare, a sense of urgency that isn't anxious, it's focused. When a child understands that time is genuinely limited, not as a threat but as a fact, they start to treat their choices differently. They become less likely to drift, less likely to let years accumulate without intention. A child who knows they won't live forever is more likely to ask early what they actually want their life to look like. That question asked young enough changes everything. The meaning of pain. Somewhere along the line, modern parenting started treating discomfort as a malfunction. If a child was struggling, the instinct was to remove the source of struggle. If they were sad, to fix the sadness. What that well-meaning reflex actually produced was a generation that arrived at adulthood with no framework for suffering, no language for it, no tolerance for it, no understanding that it might serve a purpose. Pain is data. Failure is information. Grief, frustration, and disappointment are not signs that something has gone wrong with the child's life. They are signs that the child is alive inside it. This includes the smaller stuff too. Boredom, a friendship that needs repairing, a project that didn't go the way they planned. Those moments don't need to be solved immediately. Sometimes the most useful thing a parent can do is stay nearby and say nothing, letting the child find out they can survive the feeling. That capacity, built in small doses, is what holds when the real weight arrives. The certainty illusion. The children who will thrive in the next 50 years are not the ones with the most answers. They're the ones most comfortable with not having them. Certainty is increasingly artificial. The world changes faster than any map can track, and children who were raised to need clear outcomes before they act will freeze constantly. The shift starts with something as simple as how a parent frames a decision at home. Not what's the right answer, but what's the best next move with what we know right now. That reframe teaches a child that action and certainty don't have to arrive together. A child taught to move through ambiguity, to make a reasonable decision with incomplete information and adjust as they go, is almost impossible to paralyze. This is the skill that no algorithm can replicate, because it requires tolerating the discomfort of not knowing. That tolerance has to be practiced young. It has to be modeled at home in small moments, before the stakes are high. The perfectionism death spiral. Perfectionism wears the costume of high standards, but the thing driving it is almost always fear. A child who won't submit the assignment until it's perfect, who quits the sport the first time they play badly, who avoids trying new things because they might look incompetent. That child isn't ambitious, they're terrified. The problem with perfectionism is that it mimics virtue closely enough that parents often reinforce it. They call it diligence, they call it caring about quality, but underneath it is a belief that their worth is conditional on their performance, and that belief will quietly wreck them. It shows up later as the adult who never pitches the idea, never applies for the role, never starts the thing, because not starting means never failing. The antidote isn't lowering standards, it's separating the standard from the self, teaching a child that who they are and how they perform are two different things entirely. A finished, imperfect thing teaches more than a perfect thing that never got made. The self-correction mandate. Being wrong is a skill. That sounds strange, but it's true, and it's one of the most practically useful things a child can learn. The ability to update your position when the evidence changes, without shame, without theater, is what separates people who grow from people who just accumulate years. Children who are punished for mistakes learn to hide them. Children who are shamed for changing their minds learn to double down. The correction a parent makes matters as much as the correction itself. There's a difference between "that's wrong" and "you thought it through, but here's what you missed." One attacks the idea, the other separates the child from the error and keeps them curious. A child who is taught to say, "I was wrong about that, here's what I think now," calmly, directly, without self-flagellation, learns that intellectual honesty is faster than intellectual pride. Getting to right requires being willing to leave wrong behind. The why of the end. There's a version of motivation that runs on audience, on grades, on approval, on being seen doing the right thing. And it works for a while, but it runs out. Children who are only ever motivated by external validation reach adulthood and find themselves genuinely lost the moment the audience thins. The deeper question, the one worth sitting with a child long enough to actually answer, is what they would do if no one was watching. What would they care about? What would they still pursue? A child who is thought seriously about that question has the beginning of something rare, an internal compass. Not a perfect one, not a finished one, but a real one. And a real internal compass is worth more than any external reward system ever built. The responsibility pivot. Victimhood and responsibility are not moral categories, they are cognitive habits, and habits can be changed. A child who defaults to "why is this happening to me" isn't a bad child, they're an untrained one. The pivot to "what am I going to do about this" doesn't require denying that something unfair happened, it just requires asking the more useful question. That shift from passive to active, from effect to agent, is one of the most life-altering things a parent can help a child practice. It doesn't happen once, it's a repetition. Every small frustration is a chance to rehearse it, and over enough repetitions, it becomes the default setting, the first place a child's mind goes when difficulty arrives. The emotional maturity milestone. A child who can hear hard feedback without shutting down. A child who can disagree without becoming hostile. A child who can sit across from someone in pain and not try to immediately fix or flee. These aren't personality traits that some children are born with. They are skills developed through exposure and practice, usually modeled by adults who had to develop them themselves. The child who grows up able to handle difficult truths about themselves becomes someone others trust, not because they're always right, but because they're honest about when they're not. The everything is fucked antidote. Hope based on circumstances is fragile. When things are going well, it holds. When things fall apart, and they will, it collapses. The more durable version of hope is built on character, on the belief that regardless of what the situation looks like, I am the kind of person who keeps going, who stays honest, who looks for what can be done. A child who has that belief doesn't need the world to cooperate in order to stay functional. They can hold difficulty and forward motion at the same time. That's not blind optimism. It's something quieter and more load-bearing, and it gets built the same way most durable things do, through repetition. A parent who doesn't panic visibly during hard seasons, who names what's difficult without catastrophizing it, who asks, "Okay, what can we actually do?" instead of spiraling. Children absorb that model long before they can articulate it. The sovereign future. Happiness taught as a destination, as something waiting at the end of a degree, a job, a relationship, a certain number in a bank account, is one of the most reliably cruel lessons a child can receive. Because the destination keeps moving, it always has one more requirement. Children who grow up chasing a future version of themselves that finally has enough tend to arrive at 40 still chasing. The correction isn't cynicism, it's practice. And it starts early with something as ordinary as asking a child what was good about today, not what they're looking forward to. That question repeated enough times builds a reflex, the habit of finding value in the present rather than deferring it. Teaching a child that satisfaction is something you build into ordinary days through small disciplines, chosen attention, genuine connection, gives them something no external achievement ever could. It gives them access to their own life, now, while they're living it.